You said the operative word there was built. Built. Who built? Okay.
Who designed them?
No,
Who had the genius to imagine railroads? Europeans.
The genius to imagine railroads. Okay.
Yeah.
But you said
Are
built.
there railroads in Africa?
You said yes. You said built.
Why?
You said
Because of us.
Hold up. You said okay. First of all,
that is absolutely true.
First of all, the greatest genius when it came to the building of the pyramids. Do you know what
those are white people, by the way.
Who are white people?
The Egyptians are not African. I'm sorry.
Do you know where Egypt is?
Yes, it's in North Africa.
Okay, stop. You stop right there. You just said that you said the Egyptians are not African.
Are white South Africans African?
Wait. Yes, they are African. See, okay, to be African means you come from the continent of Africa. So if you come from the continent of Africa, that's who you are. So that means you're an African. So you do know. Do you also deny science that man originated from Africa, or do you say that's false science?
What are you talking about? I mean, what are you referring to?
I'm talking
science.
Archaeology. I'm talking biology. I'm talking science. In terms of the where did man originate? White scientists.
Egypt was an amazing civilization.
No,
it was not created by black Africans. I'm sorry.
It wasn't. Who created it?
People who are white.
How are people?
You can look actually look at art, and they differentiate between races.
No, I got to ask you a question. How do you
from ancient Egyptian art?
You do know those were black people. You do know.
They weren't.
You do know from science you can't get black from white. You can get white from black. You do know when it comes to evolution.
What?
When it comes.
I see what you're saying.
Do you never studied science?
I see what you're. Yes, I have.
No, so
I mean, I'm not a scientist. Are you?
But man originated in Africa. Yes or no?
That is a consensus. Yes.
Okay. So if man originated in Africa, which means that they were Africans, then all of a sudden, when you talk about the amazing works of the Egyptians, they were people of color. I know that's a little rough for you to handle, but I know you want to hold on to that, somehow thinking whites built the pyramids. But I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, we did.
No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Because first of all, they were building things in Egypt while white Europeans were still in caves. That's a fact.
That's
a fact. Okay.
Let's pause here. This clip went viral on social media a few years ago. Many people of African descent love it because it represents a major trigger when talking about ancient Egyptian history. I wanted to play it here because I also believe that it perfectly describes one of the main triggers in world's history. In the clip, you can see the guy on the right struggling to accept the idea that ancient Egyptians could have been black. Despite all evidence pointing to their indigenous roots and geographical location, it's just not something he can wrap his head around. Sadly, this belief isn't uncommon today. To justify their stance, some people have been peddling theories about an ancient white race from the north, claiming they seeded civilizations that were later taken over by black people who supposedly erased them. You can hear it in this clip.
The blue-eyed, fair-skinned community didn't continue, but at least now researchers have an idea why. These findings suggest that the rise and fall of the Chalcolithic culture are probably due to demographic changes in the region, said May.
Both these clips are the perfect example of what's wrong with history today. People chose to believe false narratives, despite the fact that most artifacts and significant monuments like the Great Sphinx tell us that the builders and rulers of Kemet were black. You know, sometimes the best way to tackle a problem is to shift your perspective entirely. It's like taking a step back and looking at the situation from a different angle, just to see if it leads us to the same destination. Usually we get so caught up in what's right in front of us that we miss the bigger picture entirely. And that can lead to even more trouble down the road. When it comes to Kemet, I believe one way to truly understand who the indigenous people were is to take a closer look at the ancient Europeans from around the time of Kemet's emergence. You've probably heard it before, this underlying belief that the first people in Kemet were some white migrants from the north, and then later on, black people came into the scene. I've touched on this topic in some of my tweets a few months back. The ongoing debate about ancient Egypt persists because some still cling to the hope that a new discovery will confirm their belief that the original Egyptians were white. It's this hope that's holding the field back from progressing. People find it hard to accept the reality because of this hope. That's why you still hear people say, "We don't know yet. We have to wait." But in my opinion, we don't need to wait. We already have all the evidence we need to acknowledge that they were black Africans. I can make these claims confidently because they are rooted in mathematics. Mathematics isn't subjective, it's based on rationality and concrete evidence. We arrive at these conclusions when every component of the equation has been meticulously considered, leading to an inevitable outcome regardless of the variables involved. So, that's where we stand with ancient Egypt. That's why I created a video to set the record straight. But in my initial video, I couldn't cover everything. I was running out of time, and the video would have been too lengthy. So, I had to leave some things out to get it out on time. However, after looking at these additional studies, I realized the information was too important to overlook. That's why I've decided to make a part 2. So, here it is. The entire history of Europe is a lie. Here's why. Part 2. As mentioned in the video introduction, this is the second part of a video I made, so I advise you to go watch the first part before watching this one, because both videos are complementary. What I say in the previous video is extremely necessary to understand this second video. If you don't watch the first video, I can guarantee you that you won't understand this one. So, pause this one, click on the links in comments or caption of this video, watch it, and then come back here to get this finale. I'm not joking, this is real. For those who already watched that video, welcome aboard and let's start.
From the American journal Physical Anthropology, we read, "The pre-dynastic of Upper Egypt and the late dynastic of Lower Egypt are more closely related to each other than any other population. As a whole, they show ties with the European Neolithic, North Africa, modern Europe, and, more remotely, India, but not at all with Sub-Saharan Africa, Eastern Asia, Oceania, or the New World."
I didn't want to respond to this video, but many of you requested my reaction. Unlike last time, I won't react directly to the entire video. It would be too time-consuming and possibly overwhelming for many viewers. Instead, I'll focus on the main arguments presented in the original video and debunk them one by one. Let's delve into the heart of the debate, the blackness of ancient Egyptians. Contrary to what my detractors claim, I will address all their counterarguments directly and debunk them live. No need for emotional manipulation or appeals for sympathy, we'll annihilate the issues head-on. Today, we will not use any other tool than the one presented in the beginning of this video. The one that is supposed to debunk us. I won't bring anything new, and yet we will still be right at the end. So, get your popcorns and make sure to watch the video till the end. The video presents the study claiming that ancient populations of North Africa resembled Europeans and Middle Easterners, suggesting that people looking like modern Europeans lived in ancient Egypt. This argument is now used to claim some type of crazy diversity in ancient Egypt. However, most people overlook a subtle trick employed by scientists to obscure the truth. Let's replay that excerpt and see if you noticed it.
From the American journal Physical Anthropology, we read, "The pre-dynastic of Upper Egypt and the late dynastic of Lower Egypt are more closely related to each other than any other population. As a whole, they show ties with the European Neolithic, North Africa, modern Europe, and, more remotely, India, but not at all with Sub-Saharan Africa, Eastern Asia, Oceania, or the New World."
So, this was the main problem in our previous video. People claimed that because some ancient Egyptians seemed to be linked to Neolithic Europeans, it meant that some pre-dynastic Egyptians were white. If you look carefully, you must notice that this theory shared by Meta is in complete alignment with what our previous speaker said.
Originate. Where scientists, white scientists.
Egypt was an amazing civilization.
No,
it was not created by black Africans. I'm sorry.
It wasn't. Who created it?
People who are white.
How are people?
You can look actually look at art and they differentiate between races.
No, I gotta ask you a question.
The blue-eyed, fair-skinned community didn't continue, but at least now researchers have an idea why. These findings suggest that the rise and fall of the Chalcolithic culture are probably due to demographic changes in the region, said May.
In other words, it supports the idea that there was an ancient, very white community that was traveling the world, building civilizations in the south and civilizing the barbaric southern black tribes. This is something that contributes to racism and that once again I have addressed in this video. Civilization. That's a powerful word, right? A word symbolizing greatness and everything noble. But also a word that has been weaponized all over the slavery and colonial eras. For example, Western nations use the expression civilizing mission. It refers to a concept often used to justify colonialism by suggesting that the colonial nations believed they were bringing civilization, education, and progress to the colonized territories. With that colonial heritage, our perception of anything related to civilization leads us to Europe, to whiteness, and more importantly to what people call Caucasian features. And you'll understand why this is important soon. The reason why people make these memes is because to them, nothing that looks like this can be linked to civilization and all the greatness that is attached to that concept. On the other hand, it is easier to connect this feature to everything that is inferior, such as—
Who designed them? Who had the genius to imagine railroads? Europeans.
Wait a minute, the genius to imagine railroads, okay.
Yeah.
But see, but you said
Are
built.
there railroads in Africa?
You said, yes. You said built.
Why?
You
Because
said,
of us.
hold up, you said, okay, first of all, scientists, white scientists.
Egypt was an amazing civilization.
I
It
didn't
was
say
not created by black Africans. I'm sorry.
It wasn't? Who created it?
People who are white.
How are people?
You can look actually look at art and they differentiate between races.
No, I gotta ask you a question. How do you—
From ancient Egyptian art.
This belief is the main motivation behind all these white supremacist theories. The black phenotype can't be the one that civilized the world. It can't be linked to any kind of power, talent, ingenuity, or knowledge. It must only be linked to inferiority. A theory that is completely destroyed by facts. All of our ancestors were black and came from Africa. This means that all the first civilizations were built by people who still carried the African tropical phenotype. In the first video, I explain why our understanding of European history is completely biased and why using terms like Neolithic is tricking most people's understanding. Indeed, Neolithic Europeans are not identical to modern Europeans. The first inhabitants of Europe were black and dark-skinned. Some came directly from Africa. Others came from the Africans who settled in the Middle East and Anatolia. Some were still genetically linked to Africa, while others, despite still carrying the African phenotypes, mutated genetically to the point of developing new genetic markers.
And that combination of, quite dark skin and blue eyes is something that we don't imagine is typical. But that was the real appearance of these people, something that's quite rare today. We're not just conjuring this up out of nowhere. We really do have scientific data. I mean, this is as close as we're going to get to know what Cheddar Man really did look like.
He's alive. He's a person now. He's not just bones.
It's been a long and extraordinary road. 4 months of work for the artists, 2 years for the scientists, 10 millennia for Cheddar Man, to finally bring us face to face with the first Brit.
Then I told you that there had been a population change. Because most people believe that just because people live in an area today, it means that they are indigenous to that land and that they look exactly like the original population who settled there millennia ago. We tend to project our modern perception into ancient history. But that's not how it works. Through time, populations change, mutate, migrate, phenotypes change. And phenotypes are extremely sensitive to change. In a single generation, with the addition of a single foreign individual, an entire lineage can go from black to white looking. So we can't use the late generations to describe the ancient ones in areas that have experienced the encounter of different populations. It doesn't work like that. Many people attacked me in the comments and told me that I was a liar or that I didn't really understand what was being said. They claimed that ancient Europeans were identical to the modern ones and that nothing really changed. But today, I want to show you another study that confirms what I said in the previous video. The study is called Cultural Hitchhiking and Competition Between Patrilineal Kin Groups Explain the Post-Neolithic Y Chromosome Bottleneck. In the study, scientists decided to analyze changes in human populations in the ancient world, especially in the post-Neolithic period. A period that is very interesting for us because it comes right after the Neolithic period that is being used by many to link modern Europeans to ancient Egyptians, remember? This is also something mentioned by Dr. Krauss, who acknowledged that sometimes cultural changes meant population change.
Where we changed from being hunter and gatherers to early farmers, to agriculturalists with domestic animals, with crops. So there was this big change in the culture of the people. And we would like to understand is if this change of culture is also related to a change in the genetic makeup. So that this culture, which we first actually see in the Near East, in the so-called Fertile Crescent, if this change in culture was also related to maybe people coming from the Fertile Crescent, coming from the Near East, bringing domestic animals, bringing crops to Europe. So was it actually a genetic change of people with a massive inflow of genes in people into Europe with this new culture? Or was it actually something that kind of independently Europeans developed, or maybe triggered by some neighboring populations that had those ideas already and spread those ideas into Central Europe?
So scientists discovered something that completely blew their minds. It turns out, in the period right after the Neolithic era, there was a surge in genetic bottlenecks worldwide. Bottlenecks are basically events that shrink genetic diversity in a population, often leading to genetic drift. Now, this phenomenon happened at different scales all across the globe, but let's zoom in on Europe for a moment. After the Neolithic, researchers observed something fascinating. European males seemed to trace their ancestry back to a smaller number of forefathers compared to the previous period. There's less variety in male lineages compared to female ones. So, what's behind this intriguing discovery? It's all about competition among patrilineal kin groups. You see, each male haplogroup represents a different patrilineal clan. And guess what? This ties in perfectly with what I discussed in my last video. However, this is still not entirely true. Here's why. In terms of lineages, there are male and female lines. And men couldn't procreate with other men, right? So, if there was a melting pot, it might have been solely between men of both groups with the women from the opposite group, right? But there is another detail that scholars are not telling us. Research proved that the Yamnayas were mainly a group constituted of men. Basically, these men were raiding and conquering in groups of men, meaning that they were taking women from the lands they conquered. The decline in male diversity coupled with the increase in female diversity suggests a more nuanced narrative. Rather than a simple blending of cultures, it implies a darker truth. The dominant male lineages likely eliminated competing ones, seizing control and claiming the women for themselves. So, it wasn't just a harmonious fusion of cultures as some suggest. The original male lineages in Europe either perished or were unable to reproduce after their encounter with new groups, making way for a new wave of people mainly descending from the Yamnaya culture and largely disconnected from the preceding inhabitants. These newcomers are the ancestors of the majority of modern European males today. This reveals the reality of population replacements, where autosomal DNA alone fails to capture the full picture of indigenous heritage. Historically, invaders have been predominantly males, sparking competition upon entering established territories. This rivalry, fueled by factors like resources and power, often escalates into conflict, resulting in the elimination of rival male lineages while retaining their women. Consequently, female genetic diversity increases due to the merging of females from both groups, while male diversity dwindles due to the eradication of competing patrilineal clans. The victors inherit all, yet maintain some genetic ties to the previous inhabitants through indigenous maternal lineages. However, they lack the genetic legacy of the true indigenous male builders, which diminish or vanish altogether over time. Given the traditional roles of men as providers and builders, their genetic lineage represents the custodianship of indigenous achievements. By usurping their women, the descendants of invaders cannot rightfully claim indigenous status or ownership of pre-existing cultural legacies. So, what we're seeing here is a significant population shift in Europe post-Neolithic. That bottleneck serves as evidence that the majority of Neolithic Europeans didn't survive. and the severity of this bottleneck was particularly intense in West Asian, European, and South Asian populations. This suggests a substantial loss of male population during that period, which aligns with the points I made in my previous video. So, the Europeans possibly connected to North Africa weren't white Europeans who settled in North Africa, but rather ancient dark-skinned Africans who settled in Europe. Furthermore, they weren't white like modern Europeans, and most of them vanished. Therefore, this doesn't support the idea of any white presence in pre-dynastic Egypt. But now let's talk about the most important thing we must learn from this. In the study, they found that male lineages are basically patrilineal clans. They could be big or small, but each one has its own territory and history. So, think about it this way. In Africa, most Africans, from the Natufians in the Levant, the Egyptians in North Africa, to the Bantu people in South Africa, belong to haplogroup E. It's like a family tree that connects them all, even though there might be smaller clans within. And it's kind of the same deal in Europe today with the haplogroup R, from the Yamnaya clan, for instance. So, Kemites belong to the Black African clan. If you enjoyed and learned something new from this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Is this evidence enough, or do we need more? Do you think that the ancient Egyptian race debate is over? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching Mr. Imhotep's channel, and see you in the next one.